Welcome to day number 6 in the grid readings. Now we're finally ready to get to the New Testament. So far, we've spent a lot of time in the Old Testament. Wanted to make sure that you understand some of the Old Testament basis for a biblical worldview because God wrote the Old Testament and the New Testament. Well, let's take a look at what Jesus said, and especially in Matthew 22, a little bit later on in this chapter. The verses are going to be important for tomorrow's group video. But let's start up at the top here. Verse 1, Jesus told a parable. And he said, "The kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a king who prepared a great wedding feast for his son." Now, I'll let you read this parable, but at the end he says, "The wedding feast is ready." This is the man speaking to his servants. "And the guests I invited aren't worthy of the honor, so now go out to the street corners and invite everyone you see." Now, as you read this parable, you need to understand that Jesus is trying to indicate that the worldview that he's offering to everyone, and in fact, what he's going to do to make a relationship with God possible, he offers to the whole world. He doesn't just offer to Israelites. He doesn't just offer to the descendants, the physical descendants of Abraham. He's offering this to everyone, and we're beginning to see this in his parables. As you scroll a little bit further, he tells a parable about paying taxes to Caesar. And, the people asked him, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Is it right to pay taxes? And his response was really good. He said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, in other words, money, and give to God what belongs to God. Now, when you read this, you're going to see that the reason he said that is because Caesar's image was on a coin. And I think really one of the implications that Jesus is making is that what is the image that human beings have on themselves? If you remember this from Genesis, we were made in God's image. So we have God's image. Human beings have God's image sort of imprinted on our soul. And so we should give ourselves to God. That's very important in a biblical worldview. So keep that in mind as you read that passage. But I want to scroll now down to verse 37, because this is really what will prepare you for tomorrow's lesson and the group conversation that we hope you have about it. The Pharisees tried to stump Jesus, and they said, what's the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Now, they were expecting him probably to say, the first commandment or the sixth commandment or something. But look at what Jesus said. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but basically Jesus was giving them these three principles for a biblical worldview. This is really how Jesus saw the world. Here's how he saw the world. Love God, love people, love yourself, in that order. That's what he's saying. Be in proper relationship with God, and when you're in proper relationship with God, you can be in proper relationship with people, and you also should respect the fact that you have the image of God imprinted on you, and so you have worth and value and dignity because of that. So again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow in the group video, but let's just finish with one more verse here from this chapter. He turned to his disciples and to the Pharisees and said, what do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? And they said, well, he's the son of David. And as you see, Jesus is going to really reveal more than that Jesus is actually the Son of God. Jesus is God fully. Now, I know if you're new to a biblical worldview, maybe that's hard for you to understand. So we'll make sure to put some links below this video if you want to learn more about the Trinity and what it means that Jesus is God himself. But that's important in a biblical worldview. A biblical worldview boils down to not just loving God and loving people as yourself, but also then it boils down to what Jesus did to make all of that possible. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks, so I hope you continue on in this grid series. But for now, you're ready to read Matthew 22 on your own, and we'll see you tomorrow for day number 7.